Everyone, Vincenzo Calla here, and welcome to episode 36 of Let's Discuss Politics. Today, I'm glad to be joined by the Member of Parliament for Ottawa West Nepean and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of International Development, Anita Vandenbeld. Thanks, Anita, for joining me today.
It's my pleasure.
Well, it's so great to have you here in Ottawa West Nepean. It's my neighboring riding. I'm next door in Nepean, and I have a lot of family in your riding, so it's great to chat with you today.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So we're going to start with our first segment called Anita's Story, where we'll talk a bit about who you are and your political history. So first off, before we get to why you ran and all that, tell me a bit about yourself and your story and how you got your start in politics.
Okay. Well, I was always interested in politics from as early an age as I can remember, both international politics and Canadian politics. My parents were immigrants. They were never in political parties or anything like that. But my dad watched the news every night at 5 o'clock, and then during supper he'd be talking about everything on the news. And so I was socialized to politics very young in the home. But I joined the Liberal Party when I was 15 years old, and much to the surprise of my parents, they're like, you can do that, you can join a party. So got very involved in Young Liberals, but at the same time I was also very involved in activism in things like Amnesty International and civil liberties and the Green Club and a number of other things, and still very much interested in international politics. So if you look at my career, I've sort of gone back and forth. For some time I worked on Parliament Hill, but I also, my studies were in constitutional Canadian history, went to master's and part of a PhD, but then I went overseas and I worked in Bosnia and I worked in Kosovo and in Congo, Bangladesh, a number of other places. But that draw, that pull to make a difference and do something, and that interest in politics never left. And so in 2010, I ran for a nomination, lost the 2011 election, but then won in 2015, and still looking at both. Right, it's the international politics, the international human rights. I think just the passion to try to make a difference in the world somehow. And there's no better way to do that than through elected politics.
Definitely. And on that now, in terms of being elected, so you did run in 2011 and you lost, but you came back in 2015 and you won, and you've won two more times, and you're sitting here almost 8 years later. Why did you decide to run as for member of parliament for federal government? And why did you run in 2011, then in 2015 again? Why did you run?
So I was actually managing a global network called I Know Politics, which was to support women in politics around the world. I was working at the UN in New York. I got to travel every few weeks to a different country and talk to women who were running or who were elected in different countries around the world. It was my dream job. But at the same time, you'll recall that was when Stephen Harper was prime minister, and there were a number of things that were happening on the global stage that really came to the fore in my circles. So, for instance, what really triggered it was one day there was I had regional coordinators in different countries, and in Mali was my sub-Saharan Africa regional coordinator named Mariam. And one day she said to me, "You Canadian women are hypocrites." And I said, What do you mean? She goes, "I studied at McGill, and I know that Canadian women have reproductive rights, but us women in Africa, it's not good enough for us." And it turns out that the Harper government had, without any notice, shut down a clinic in her home village that had been there for 40 years because one of the things they did was provide abortion. And then I was talking to other women around the world. And then at one point, I was in a group of women from places like Myanmar, Burma, Zimbabwe, who had, when they ran for office, they were beaten. There was sexual violence. Their families were threatened. Friends were imprisoned or disappeared. And then they turned to me and they said, "Anita, here you are. You're encouraging us to run. But Canada used to be there for us, the women of the Global South. And why aren't you running? You could run in Canada and you could make a bigger difference for us." And how do you look at these women and not react to that? And it was very shortly after that I announced that I was going to run for the nomination, and against the foreign minister, against John Baird. Everyone told me I was crazy, leaving the UN job to do that. But I think if I hadn't run in 2011, I probably wouldn't have had the base established to have been able to actually win in 2015. So it's something that I've never regretted.
So we're going to talk a bit now about your work over the past 7 years since eventually winning that election in Ottawa West Nepean in our segment called Serving as an Elected Official. So first off, I wanted to ask you locally, what's your favorite part about serving Ottawa West Nepean as their MP, sorry.
It has to be my coffee hours. It actually came from an idea from women in Congo, who every Saturday would go to the Saturday market because there's not that much public space for women in parts of Africa. And so that's where they would be, and they would just meet with whoever was there. And I thought, too bad we don't have a Saturday market in Canada. And then I thought, yeah, we do. We have shopping malls. So I ended up parking myself at Carlingwood Mall, right outside the Tim Hortons where all the tables are. And every Saturday I would sit there for a number of hours and just announce to people that I was there. And that was before I was elected. That was during that interim between 2011 and 2015. And when I was elected, I decided I want to continue that. So I continued, it's changed to Fridays, but I continued it on at Tim Hortons. Then I moved to Algonquin College, and now I do it on Zoom. But if I can at all help it, I never miss a Friday. And listening to, it's become something even more important because it isn't just me hearing from constituents, but what started to happen is constituents and neighbors are starting to hear each other. And I've noticed on a lot of issues, we're not talking to each other anymore. We're in our social media bubbles. We get our news from only like-minded people. And we don't hear each other. And so what happens on these calls is someone will join with very strong opinions, and then everyone gets a chance to respond before I do. Well, I do mostly throughout, but they hear from the neighbors. And I think these conversations, this is something we need to do more in politics to keep from polarization. And I got to tell you, I get people asking me all the time on the Hill, where do you get your ideas from? You always have something new on every subject. I was like, I get them from my constituents. Isn't that the job? That's what I'm supposed to do. But it's become a touchstone for me. I look forward to it. It's a bit of a reality as well, because you can get very caught in the bit of toxic nature of what goes on in question period and, in Parliament sometimes. And, just getting to listen to what real people are concerned about and thinking about and how they're viewing what I'm doing. And it's a bit of an early warning system too, because I can tell you, if there's an issue coming up that they're not happy about, that's when I get a whole lot of people showing up. But then I know about it and I can do something about it.
Well, I'm glad that you said that because I was going to ask you a question about your coffee hours anyways, because I've heard so much about it. I mean, during the municipal election, I did a series where I interviewed 60 people running for municipal election, many of those being in College Ward, Knoxdale, Maryville, which are within your constituency. And whether on the call or off the call or on the interview or off the interview, I always heard, oh, I want to do more coffee hours like Anita Vandenbeld because you seem to be the gold standard for constituency relations to all the candidates who joined me and it's important whether it's through Zoom or through in person or consultations, that sort of thing. It's important to connect with constituents because as I stressed in that series, as I always stress in my show, in all my shows, the elected officials are there to serve us, to serve the people, and we elect the people and the you guys and we want to share ideas and you want to hear our ideas. So it's really good, and I'm sure you bring a lot to the Hill, like you said. And on that now, I wanted to ask you, I usually ask what's your favorite achievement in Ottawa, but you are in Ottawa. So what's your favorite achievement on Parliament Hill, like through your work over the past 7 years? What has been your favorite achievement?
So when in my first term, I was named as the chair of the Special Committee on Pay Equity, and I tried very hard to get a consensus report, which everyone said on a polarizing issue like that there was no way, but we did, and we recommended creating a pay equity commissioner, and among a number of other things, including childcare for that matter. But then in the following budget, we actually did have the establishment of a pay equity commissioner and pay equity legislation in Canada, which feminists have been trying for 40 years to get national pay equity legislation. Some provinces do have that, but for the federally regulated sector. And on an equality issue, I think that was the issue where it was most direct, where I did work, and then we saw the result. There's a number of other things that I've been doing a lot of work on, but they haven't quite come to fruition yet. So I can't say that they're successes yet, but I'm working on it. But that one is one that I think has changed a lot of lives, even if people don't realize. I think the fact that you have employers who need to report on what they're paying men and women, and you have a commissioner, and I think that is making a real difference.
And before we go on to the next segment, I want to ask you a bit about your parliamentary secretary role in international development. What have you been doing over the past little while in that portfolio, serving the minister and working with the Minister of International Development? And what's the type of work you've been doing there?
So that is my two worlds coming together, because I was always very interested in both international and politics here, and so now I get to do both. And just last weekend, I returned from Dakar, Senegal, where I was representing Canada as the head of delegation at a global food security summit for food in Africa. And we all know the situation is really, really dire right now. For We've got right now 45 million people on the brink of famine, and many of those in Africa. And so I was able to not only participate in the summit and speak, but have bilateral meetings with some of our ministers and presidents in different countries in Africa. But I also got to visit one of our projects, and I think all Canadians need to see what we do. It was a nutrition project in a small town, and I got there, and first of all, the whole town showed up. And I got to weigh the babies and see all the nutrition and the support that's given. In 2 years in that project, there was 26% malnutrition of infants. And now there's 3% in just 2 years because of our project. And at the end, the whole village got together under a big tree, and they sang, and they had the drums. And when they translated what they were singing, "Thank you, Canada. Our children are healthy because of Canada. Thank you, Canada." And my heart just grew 1,000-fold, because you don't always see it. You talk about things like nutrition and babies and children in Africa, but to actually visit and see was really phenomenal. And one of the things that I'm there's two areas I've been working very hard. One is democracy. I think the greatest division in the world right now isn't east-west or north-south, or it's between authoritarianism and democracy, and we need to shore that up everywhere. So I've been working very hard on that and creating a Canadian Democracy Institute. But the other one is our feminist international assistance policy. And I think that when I go back to that moment where the women in the global south turned to me and said, "You could really make a difference. Why aren't you running?" I fought very hard from the beginning to have that, and now to be able to be on the ground and see the difference it's making, not just for women and girls, but when you invest in women and girls and involve them in the project, it changes it for everybody, for the whole community, and to be able to see that in effect is a little bit full circle for me. So I'm very much enjoying this position.
We're going to go into the last segment now, which is called The World of Politics Around Us, where we'll talk a bit about this crazy world of politics that surrounds us every day. So first off, I wanted to ask you, who is or who was another politician or politicians that inspire you as a member of parliament?
So in all honesty, I have to say it was Grant Mitchell. When I was 16, he was running for leader of the Alberta Liberal Party provincially, and I supported him. And it was really my first campaign. And that first campaign is one that you never forget. He lost, but then he later became leader. And then years later got appointed to the Senate by Paul Martin, and just recently retired. But I would say that a lot of how I do politics, I didn't even realize until I started talking to him again. I think I learned from him. And a lot of it is just that connection with people, not forgetting why you got into politics in the first place, fighting for things, even if it's not politically easy to do, but sticking to it, the perseverance, but also just the genuineness, the sincerity, just being real. And it's really hard in politics. Sometimes you have to be self-aware. You always have to think about what you're saying, because there's a lot of gotcha politics now. And a lot of politicians get so self-conscious that they stopped being genuine. And he was always genuine. He always fought incredibly hard for things that he really believed in, like environment. And I think I still call him from time to time, ask his advice. Just a really, really wise person with a lot of experience, but always stayed true to himself. And I think that's probably why I would say that he's the person I turn to when I really need to just sort of think about my political path and what I should do.
And finally, now I wanted to ask you, this question is always one of the biggest ones that everybody likes to talk about. And I wanted to ask you, what do you think is an issue or some issues that you would like to focus on more and just generally need to be focused on more in politics?
Definitely democracy. And I mean democracy here and around the world. I think the biggest threat right now is that there are elements in society that are not battling ideas on the floor of the House, but actually working to undermine the democratic system itself. And we know that there are nation states, China and Russia and Iran and others, that are working together and working actively to undermine democratic principles around the world. And when I say democracy, I mean people being able to have a say in how they are governed themselves, the accountability, the inclusion, and this includes equality for women. It includes having systems of governance where you're not fighting in the streets. You're having respectful debate in the chamber of whatever legislative body. It really is under threat right now. People are, because of COVID, because of climate change and number of crises that are happening, the food security crisis, inflation. People are starting to lose faith, not in the politicians, but in the processes. And I worry that people are looking to easy answers. They're looking to populism and to authoritarianism. People who come in and say, "Well, I've got the answer," and not realizing that with complex issues, you need to have that political dialogue and debate. And democracy takes time. Democracy is not overnight. When you want to change things, you have to work through the system because you have to listen to people. You have to find compromises. And I'm really, really worried that too many people are turning away from that. And if you look around the world, there's a number of countries that are moving toward not just authoritarianism, but undermining of human rights, of rule of law, of freedom of the press, of the things that we've come to in the 20th century, in the 21st century. These are things that have led to peace since World War II, and I'm very worried about the international rules-based order. So I think that everything that I do, whether it's the coffee hour, which is really about creating that democratic discourse and dialogue and engaging citizens back in the decisions that I make, to the work that we're doing internationally, where we need to support Ukraine, because this is Russia is blatantly undermining the value systems and the democracy. They are fighting for our democracy as well. And I'm very, very concerned about China and about you look at what's happening to the Uyghurs, but you look at what's happening everywhere in the world. There's a rise in this. So I think that we need to be spending more time. It's hard because when people are struggling with paying their mortgages and people are really, really tired after the pandemic, we have huge healthcare issues. It's really hard to sort of go back and look at the processes and the structures. But if we lose that, then none of those things that we have come to rely on in our very prosperous and peaceful society, we won't have any of that. So, that's where I think we need to really focus a little bit more attention.
And democracy is so important. It's the reason why we're sitting here today having an open discussion about what you've been doing as an elected member of parliament for 8 years. And
Exactly.
it's a big part about everything that surrounds us in our country and the freedoms and the everything we enjoy in this country. And a great way to end our interview today.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. I really enjoyed this.
Well, that is all for today. So thank you, Anita, for joining me. It was so great having you. And if you liked this interview, make sure to go check out our other interview on Instagram for top 10. If you're watching this at the date of the release, it will be coming out on Friday. Stay updated on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok at VC Productions 25. Check out vincenzocalla.com, my website. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. Make sure to also choose to get notifications here on YouTube. Let's Discuss Politics is a VCalla production. So until the next video, I'm Vincenzo Calla, signing out.